My unfaithful wife went out to a party with our neighbor, and that night I discovered the truth. It was the last time I believed there was anything left to salvage in our family. My words were trapped in my throat, but when I saw her, I couldn't hold back. "If you didn't love me, you didn't have to betray me," I said, my voice laced with anger and sorrow. "Now you've ruined everything, especially our beloved family." She remained silent, her once confident gaze faltering briefly before settling back into a calmness that felt unbearable, as though she had planned this all along, like this betrayal was just another step in a path she had chosen, coldly and without hesitation. The pain of betrayal, discovering the person you loved shared moments, smiles and desires with someone else, is overwhelming. I had trusted her completely. We made plans, shared years together, and in that moment she looked at me as if none of it mattered anymore. What I didn't know, and what would hurt even more, was that this betrayal wasn't just a mistake or a moment of weakness, it was the final blow of a much larger scheme. There were signs, of course, small moments of coldness, insincere apologies, empty stares, but I ignored them. Who in their right mind wants to believe that the love of their life could be replaced by a fleeting affair with the neighbor? Deep down, I refused to see the truth that was right before my eyes. And now, with everything revealed, it was too late. She didn't apologize, nor did she try to explain. There was a calculated coldness in her actions, as if she had justified this betrayal to herself, maybe even convincing herself that she wasn't wrong. I loved her with everything I had, my life, my trust, my soul, and in the end, all I received was a stab in the back. Why, I asked involuntarily, still trying to make sense of it all. She looked at me, weighing her words. "Because it's over." "It has been for a while," she replied, her words falling like stones, crushing what was left of me. "You knew it wasn't working anymore. I was just waiting for the right moment to say it, but you couldn't see it." This betrayal wasn't a mistake or a lapse, it was the final step she had been waiting for so she could move on. But there was something I didn't know, something hidden beneath her cold, indifferent exterior. She didn't cheat for pleasure, or because I lacked something. There was a purpose behind it all, a quiet plan to destroy what we had built and leave me alone in the wreckage. Now, all I'm left with is an unbearable question. How long had she been planning this? When did she decide I was no longer enough? And even worse, what would she do next? I thought betrayal was the worst thing that could happen, but what lay ahead was far worse. The California sun shone brightly that Friday afternoon, bathing the streets and houses in a warm, almost poetic light. Their home, nestled in a quiet neighborhood with a well-kept garden, looked like the perfect picture of family stability. Inside, however, James and Olivia's lives were anything but serene. James was a hard-working man who loved his family deeply, dedicating his life to ensuring Olivia and their 2 children never lacked anything. His calloused hands from work also knew how to be tender in moments of affection, and he believed he was living the life he had always dreamed of: a stable home, a beautiful wife, and 2 children he adored. Olivia, on the other hand, embodied the modern woman, elegant, intelligent, and always seeking new challenges. Her quiet charm and independence had won James over from the start. Though she was a devoted homemaker, she was also a woman with ambitions beyond her role as a wife and mother. James admired this, even if her constant search for something more sometimes left him uneasy. From the outside, they appeared to be the perfect couple, but subtle cracks were beginning to show. Small disagreements that once ended with a kiss now dragged on in silence. Nights once filled with laughter and deep conversations on the porch were now spent in front of the TV, each lost in their own thoughts. James was worried. He sensed something was changing, but clung to the belief that their love was strong enough to weather any storm. He wasn't one to give up easily, and every time he felt Olivia slipping away, he tried to pull her back with simple gestures: a surprise dinner, flowers for no reason. But Olivia seemed increasingly absorbed in her own world. She smiled, but there was a growing emptiness in her eyes that James couldn't quite name. While he focused on work and family, Olivia seemed more involved in pursuits outside their home: new friends, events, meetings that never seemed to end. Although James trusted her, he couldn't ignore the unease that crept in whenever she left with little explanation, kissing him quickly before disappearing out the door. Despite the subtle discomfort, James never questioned their marriage. To him, these moments of disconnection were just a normal part of a long-term relationship. They had faced challenges before and always come through. He had faith in Olivia, in their love, and in the family they had built, but Olivia felt trapped, unable to express the restlessness growing inside her. She loved James and her children, but something always demanded more. For James, stability was a source of comfort, but for Olivia it felt like stagnation. That dissatisfaction was what drew her closer to their neighbor, Daniel, a recently divorced man who had moved in next door. Daniel exuded a different kind of charm, not immediately obvious but revealed in conversation and his relaxed approach to life. He was the kind of person who made everything seem simple, unburdened by the weight of responsibilities that had always hung over her. Olivia justified it to herself as just a friendship, a harmless escape from the growing cracks in her life. Talking to Daniel was easy. He listened, laughed at her jokes, and made her feel alive again, something she hadn't felt with James in a long time. It wasn't that James did anything wrong, she just felt trapped in a life that had become predictable. Gradually, Daniel's presence became more common. He would stop by their house with small excuses, like helping in the garden or chatting about the weather. Quick conversations turned longer, and their meetings became more frequent. James noticed, of course, but he never suspected anything was wrong. Daniel was the polite neighbor, and Olivia was his loyal wife. He trusted them both, never imagining those chats by the garden fence could be more than friendly exchanges. James's world continued as usual, with no significant changes, while for Olivia each day felt increasingly distant. She kept playing her role as a caring mother and devoted wife, but something was missing in her eyes, something James, busy with work and family, didn't have time to see. What once was the foundation of their lives now felt like a cage to Olivia, who longed for a change, any change. Days passed with James striving to hold the family together, while Olivia silently planned her escape, one James never saw coming. Their marriage remained, but the ground beneath it was beginning to shift. As days flew by, James felt time slipping through his fingers, caught between work and home, while Olivia seemed to drift further away. There was a coldness in her actions and a look that never fully met his. James tried to dismiss it as stress or the weight of routine, but deep down he knew something was wrong. The marriage, once a source of comfort, had become a minefield, and James unknowingly walked on eggshells to avoid triggering it. Meanwhile, Olivia wrestled with her own inner turmoil, no longer recognizing herself as the woman who used to smile when James came home, the one who was once satisfied with their predictable life. Daniel, the neighbor, became her outlet, a friend who demanded nothing more than her company. In those moments, she found a freedom that she no longer felt at home. Their conversations grew more intimate, shifting from trivial chatter to deeper subjects Olivia kept hidden. One evening, after another superficial chat with James over dinner, Olivia felt the weight of the decision she had made but hadn't yet spoken aloud. She looked at James, devoted and unaware, and felt a mix of guilt and resentment. How could he not see it? How could he not realize that for her their marriage was already over? She wanted to scream, to throw the truth out there, but James's calm gaze always stopped her. In the following days, James grew more bothered by Olivia's frequent absences. She often went out with friends or had meetings for her projects, but these events now seemed constant. Her phone buzzed regularly, and while James wasn't usually a suspicious husband, he couldn't ignore the growing unease. Just another dinner with the project team, she'd explain in a rush. Wearing clothes, he rarely saw something more formal, something that stood out. James tried to smile and be understanding, but inside he felt lost. One afternoon, James came home early from work. The kids were at school, and Olivia had mentioned an important work meeting. Yet something didn't feel right, a nagging sensation as if something was waiting to be uncovered. Moving through the empty house, he saw Olivia's phone left behind in the living room. It was an impulse he had never acted on before, but the anxiety in his chest was overwhelming. He unlocked the phone, and with that simple act, everything began to unravel. Countless messages between Olivia and Daniel appeared. James read the first few lines, his heart sinking as disbelief turned into painful reality. The words left no room for doubt. "I can't wait to be with you again." He scrolled further, each message a slow, agonizing stab to his confidence, pride, and faith in the love he had always thought was unbreakable. Days blurred together as James moved through his routines, struggling to process what he had found. He watched Olivia, who continued to laugh with their kids and talk about plans, completely unaware that he knew. The betrayal was a constant, throbbing pain, but he needed more than messages to confirm how far it had gone, something concrete that would reveal the full extent of it all. On Friday, he made a decision: he would follow Olivia. She left early, dressed for another meeting which James now understood as nothing more than a cover. He waited a few minutes before getting in his car and tailing her from a distance. He knew the route to her work, but Olivia took a different turn, heading into a quieter neighborhood before stopping in front of Daniel's house. James parked far enough to remain unseen, his heart pounding. Olivia got out of her car, glanced around, and walked up to Daniel's door. Daniel greeted her with a smile that made her blush, and they kissed at the door, casually, as if it were something they had done countless times. James felt his stomach churn as the world seemed to stop. Every part of him wanted to confront them, to demand answers, but he remained frozen in his seat, unable to fully grasp what he was witnessing. His mind reeled, overwhelmed by a silent, crushing pain that consumed him from the inside. He stayed there, parked in the dark, while the lights inside Daniel's house glowed. Each passing minute felt like an eternity, and his thoughts spun with questions that had no answers. How had this started? Where did he go wrong? When exactly had he lost her? James was fully aware that when Olivia returned home that night, she would pretend everything was as it always had been. She would continue to use her sweet words, maintain the facade of a devoted wife, and act as if nothing was amiss. But James knew the truth now, and he understood that things would never be the same. That night, he couldn't sleep. Scenes of what he had witnessed replayed relentlessly in his mind. Olivia and Daniel, completely shameless and without remorse, behaving as if the world around them and James didn't exist. However, it wasn't the kiss or the physical betrayal that hurt the most. It was the sheer indifference with which she treated him, as if he were meaningless in her life. James, who had always believed he was building a stable life, now felt as though everything was falling apart beneath him. The next morning, Olivia continued her usual routine, preparing coffee, while the children ran around the house just as she had done for years. James observed her every move with a distant gaze, struggling to comprehend. He had spent the entire night awake, mulling over his discoveries, yet he still felt there was something missing, a gap, a piece that didn't quite fit. The betrayal, as painful as it was, seemed like part of a larger issue. James sensed that Olivia was hiding something deeper, something he hadn't uncovered yet. The tension was almost tangible, but Olivia seemed oblivious. She smiled at him, kissed him goodbye, and left for what she called another appointment. James knew he could no longer delay the confrontation. The pain, anger, and wounded pride were all simmering inside him, ready to erupt. As soon as the children were off to school, he called Olivia. His voice was calm on the other end, as if nothing had changed. "We need to talk," he said plainly. "Of course, James. What happened that evening when Olivia came home? The atmosphere was different." James was seated at the table in the living room, a space once filled with light-hearted conversations and future plans, but now heavy with tension and expectation. Olivia walked in, removed her shoes, and immediately sensed that something was about to unfold. James waited for her to sit before speaking. There was no point in delaying this. His heart was racing, filled with pain and anger. He wanted to confront her, but he also wanted to hear the truth from her lips. "I know," he began bluntly. Olivia's eyes wavered for a moment. She had known this moment would come, but she was unprepared when it finally arrived. "You know what?" she asked, attempting to keep her voice steady, though it trembled slightly. James didn't look away. "Your meetings with Daniel." The silence that followed was deafening. Olivia lowered her head, running her hand through her hair, as if searching for the right words, but there were none suitable for this moment. She knew she was caught, and all that remained was to decide how to proceed. "James," she began, but her words faltered. No excuses could mend this. "How long, Olivia?" he demanded, his voice controlled but laden with pain. "How long has this been going on?" Olivia took a deep breath, unable to meet his gaze. "Months," the word echoed in James's mind, each syllable cutting deep. All those months when he believed in his solid marriage, Olivia had been living another life. "Why?" he whispered, his voice tinged with agony. "Why would you do this to me, to our family?" Olivia finally met his eyes, and for the first time James saw the unvarnished truth in her expression. There were no more lies, no more pretense. "Because it's over, James. Our marriage, it's been over for a long time." Her confession hit him like a punch to the gut. The certainty in her voice, the lack of hesitation, it was the final blow. "You can't mean that?" he stammered, unable to process what he was hearing. "We have a life together, a family." "I know," Olivia interrupted, "but the truth is, I haven't felt anything for years. I've been pretending, keeping up appearances, but it doesn't work anymore." James was silent, absorbing the weight of her words. He searched her face for any sign of the woman he had loved, but all he saw was a stranger. The gap between them, which he had ignored for so long, now seemed insurmountable. "You don't love me anymore." It wasn't a question, it was a statement. Olivia hesitated, but then nodded slightly. "Not the way you deserve." James felt as though the ground was crumbling beneath him. Everything he had thought was secure was now exposed as a lie. He studied Olivia's face, looking for any trace of regret, but instead she appeared relieved, as if she had finally let go of a long-held burden. "Then why didn't you tell me before?" he asked, his voice breaking. "Why wait until now? Why betray me instead of just being honest?" Olivia looked down once more. "I didn't know how to do it without destroying everything. I didn't want to hurt you or the kids. I thought I could keep things intact, even though I wasn't happy. And then Daniel came along. He was my way out." Olivia's words fell like cold rain on James, each sentence amplifying his pain. There were no justifications, just the harsh reality that she had used her affair as an escape route. "So that's it?" James asked, struggling to believe. "Daniel was your way to get rid of me?" Olivia exhaled deeply, guilt written all over her face. "I never wanted it to end like this." But yes, James stood up, unable to remain there any longer. The woman he had loved for so many years, with whom he had built a family, had chosen a different path, and worse, she had betrayed him to escape. Now, he was left alone, grappling with the ruins of a marriage Olivia had abandoned long before. James rose from the table without glancing back, feeling Olivia's betrayal and words press upon him like an inescapable verdict. Everything he knew and believed seemed to unravel. The memories, the future plans, the sense of security, all vanished with Olivia's cold and calculated confession. The room was silent except for the sound of his heavy breathing, echoing through the house and amplifying his sense of desolation. He felt trapped in a nightmare from which there was no escape. He walked into the hallway and stood before the mirror. His reflection showed a man he no longer recognized, pale skin, weary eyes, and pain etched into every line of his face. How had he ended up here? How could the woman he loved so deeply abandon him in such a calculated, silent manner? And how had he, always attentive and devoted, never noticed the chasm growing between them? As James struggled with the overwhelming emotions, Olivia cautiously approached, her hands trembling slightly as though she knew that words would be insufficient to mend the damage. She stopped a few steps away, hesitant to come closer. There was something in James's posture, a mix of regret and resignation. "James," she began, but he raised his hand, cutting off her attempt to speak. "No," he said, his voice hoarse and heavy with hurt. "There's nothing more to say." The silence between them stretched on, laden with meanings they both struggled to comprehend. James observed Olivia, and for a fleeting moment noticed something different about her, a profound inner conflict that extended beyond the betrayal itself. It wasn't just the act of infidelity, but the fact that she had meticulously planned every move, every word, deciding not only to leave James but to dismantle everything they had built without ever giving him the chance to fight for it. Anger began to rise within James. Betrayal could be endured and even forgiven with time and truth, but knowing she had kept secrets, that their marriage had died for her long before he ever knew, was too much. Now, standing before her, he felt like the last to know his own life. "You've already made your decision, haven't you?" he asked, his voice cold. "Long before this you'd already chosen to leave." Olivia lowered her head, unable to respond immediately. I didn't know how to tell you, James. I didn't know how to end this without destroying everything." "And then you decided to betray me," he interrupted, bitterness lacing his words. "Was this your way of punishing me or freeing yourself from guilt? Because that's exactly how it feels, Olivia. Instead of facing the problem, you took the coward's way out." Olivia tried to respond but stopped when she saw James's unwavering gaze. She knew that nothing she said would matter anymore. The truth lay bare and he wouldn't accept any excuses. She understood there were no justifications that could repair the damage she had done. James took a step back, crossing his arms as if shielding what little remained of his dignity. He was faced with the most challenging moral dilemma of his life, anger and pain warring with the desire to understand. Could he forgive her? Could he accept that he might share some responsibility for the distance between them? Or should he let her go, as she had already done in her heart? He stared at Olivia for a long moment, as though seeing a stranger. The dilemma was immense. If he chose to forgive, he knew things would never be the same. The trust and bonds that had supported their marriage were irreparably broken. On the other hand, letting her go meant shattering the life he had spent years building, the stability of his family, and the safety of his children. He wondered how he could possibly make this choice, how to decide between forgiveness and the end of everything. Olivia stepped forward cautiously. "James, I know what I did is unforgivable, but I never wanted it to end like this." "Don't say you didn't want it to end like this," he cut her off, his voice dripping with bitterness. "You knew exactly what you were doing." She fell silent, realizing that he was right once again. She had planned every action, but now, seeing the pain in James's eyes, she grasped the true weight of her choices. She hadn't just betrayed him physically, she had condemned him emotionally, shattering their marriage and the man standing before her. James sighed deeply, as if searching for the strength to continue. "You decided I wasn't enough for you, so now I will decide for myself." Olivia watched him, fearful of what he might say next, unsure whether he would choose to confront the pain or leave it behind. James felt the gravity of every word. Taking control of the situation was something he never imagined he would have to do. The helplessness he felt upon discovering Olivia's betrayal was slowly giving way to something clearer, a need to make a decision about the future. But for now, all he could do was walk away. His mind was flooded with conflicting thoughts, and all he craved was time, a moment to breathe. He turned and headed to the bedroom, leaving Olivia standing alone in the room. The door closed gently, but the sound reverberated through the house, as if marking a moment of irreversible change. Olivia remained motionless, staring blankly, the bitter taste of guilt lingering in her mouth. She had confessed, but instead of feeling relief, she was now confronted with the stark reality of her choices and the damage she had caused. Control was no longer hers, everything was now in James's hands. Hours passed in a suffocating silence as Olivia paced the house, struggling to process the events. She had always known that one day she would face the consequences of her decisions, but she never anticipated the difficulty. She felt exposed, vulnerable, with no escape, and for the first time in ages the future felt uncertain. James lay in the bedroom, staring at the ceiling, his mind filled with questions that had no answers. He reflected on everything they had been through, on every moment that once seemed genuine but now felt tainted. It wasn't just the betrayal itself that hurt, but the deeper meaning behind it. To James, Olivia symbolized trust, safety, and love, and he couldn't comprehend how she could so easily cast it all aside. A nagging dilemma had haunted him from the start. Could he find it within himself to forgive her? Could they possibly rebuild what was broken, or was the betrayal an insurmountable wall between them? The love he had for Olivia still lingered, but it was now entangled with resentment and disappointment, emotions he wasn't sure he could untangle. As night fell and darkness enveloped the house, Olivia hesitantly approached their bedroom and opened the door. James was lying on the bed, eyes closed, but she knew he wasn't asleep. She sat quietly at the edge of the bed, struggling to find the right words. For a long moment, the only sound was their breathing, each coping with the pain in their own way. "James," she whispered, unsure of what else to say. He didn't respond immediately, opening his eyes slowly and turning to face her. His expression was weary, weighed down by the emotional toll of what had happened. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, controlled, yet filled with profound sadness. "I just need to know why you didn't tell me sooner. I could have dealt with the truth. I could have faced knowing you were unhappy. But what you did took away my chance to try to fix things, and that's what hurts the most." Olivia felt a lump in her throat. She had never imagined they would reach this point, where the man she had once shared everything with now felt like a stranger. His words struck her deeply, and she realized that she hadn't just broken her marriage, she had shattered James's spirit. It wasn't only the act of betrayal, it was that she had robbed him of the chance to fight, to choose. "I'm so sorry," she murmured, tears finally spilling down her face. "I was so lost, and I didn't know how to handle it. I thought this was the only way out." James watched her break down, feeling no longer anger, just an overwhelming sense of exhaustion. Her remorseful words did not change the facts. He was still grappling with the choice: forgive and attempt to move forward, or accept that this chapter was over. Olivia continued to cry, and though James knew she was still the woman he had shared his life with, that life now felt distant, almost as if it belonged to someone else. He got up, walked past her without a word, and left the room. He needed space, distance from everything. Outside, the sky was filled with stars, but James barely noticed them. He felt small, burdened by the weight of his own existence. The pain of being betrayed by the person he loved most still throbbed within him, and although forgiveness was conceivable, he couldn't envision a path forward that didn't involve losing himself along the way. He took a deep breath, trying to calm his mind, but the real challenge still loomed. Would he be able to rebuild his life after all that had transpired? The dawn brought a false sense of calm, but the heavy atmosphere of the previous night's events lingered. James hadn't slept, spending the night lost in contemplation about his next steps. Olivia, in another room, could hardly bear to face the consequences of her actions. The betrayal had not only destroyed their marriage but also closed the door to any possibility of turning back. When the sun finally filled the house with light, James made his decision. There would be no reconciliation. He rose slowly, feeling the weight of every movement, ready to face the reality of a life altered forever. It felt as though he was burdened with the weight of a lifetime, but James was resolute. He walked into the kitchen, where Olivia was already seated, her eyes puffy from crying. They gazed at each other in silence for what felt like an eternity. There were no more words left to exchange. The quiet between them spoke volumes. Despite the lingering love he felt for her, James knew deep down that staying would mean condemning himself to a future filled with pain and mistrust. He couldn't continue like this any longer. "I'm leaving," he said, his voice surprisingly calm, even to himself. "There's nothing left for us here." Olivia looked at him, struggling to find a response. His words, though spoken softly, carried an unyielding finality. She realized that what she had done was beyond forgiveness, and as she watched him walk away, the harsh reality of her loss hit her with crushing force. Though she had braced herself for the end, nothing could prepare her for the true agony of losing James. James gathered his belongings quietly, never once glancing back. He knew that staying would only pull him back into a cycle of pain and regret, a cycle he was determined to escape. He longed for peace, a fresh start, even if it meant rebuilding his life from the ground up. As he walked out the door, a strange mix of sadness and relief washed over him. He was finally breaking free, but at the cost of everything he once knew. Olivia stayed behind in the kitchen, watching James leave through the window. Tears streamed down her face once more, but this time there was no one left to comfort her. She was alone, and the weight of that solitude struck her deeply. She had lost the one man who had truly loved her, and now all that remained was emptiness. In the months that followed, James's life took a new turn. He moved into a modest apartment, far from the memories of his broken marriage. He began focusing on himself, picking up old hobbies, and trying to rediscover who he was beyond the role of a betrayed husband. Though the emotional scars lingered, he gradually found a sense of peace. Olivia's presence still haunted his thoughts occasionally, but he knew leaving her had been the right decision. Some things simply couldn't be mended. Olivia, on the other hand, was left to face the full weight of her actions. Daniel, the man for whom she had risked everything, quickly faded from her life. Their fling, fueled by thrill and desire, couldn't withstand the harsh realities outside their bubble. He moved on, leaving Olivia to confront the aftermath of her betrayal alone. She tried to return to her daily life, but nothing felt the same. Her home, once filled with warmth, was now just an empty shell where guilt and regret echoed through every room. She thought of James constantly, but she knew he would never return. The marriage she had destroyed was a painful reminder of what could have been. The freedom she once sought in her solitude had turned into a heavy burden. Olivia found herself trapped in an endless loop of remorse, unable to find a way forward. While James worked to rebuild his life, shedding the weight of his past, Olivia was swallowed by her own guilt. Every attempt to move on was overshadowed by the mistakes of her past. The memories of her life with James and the betrayal she had inflicted were ever present, haunting reminders of what she had lost. The cost of her actions was far greater than she had ever anticipated. Meanwhile, James, though deeply affected by the experience, managed to move forward. He learned that the end of one chapter could be the beginning of another. The pain of betrayal never fully vanished, but he found the strength to start anew. Slowly, the peace he had longed for began to return to his life. Tell us what you thought of this story. Did you connect with any of the characters? What moment impacted you the most? Don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. Remember, this channel does not condone any form of betrayal. We stand by the values of truth, trust, and mutual respect in all relationships. See you in the next story.